Well, it's been nearly 20 years since our world stopped here in Southeast Louisiana as Hurricane Katrina hit and infrastructure failed. In the storm's wake, New Orleans' entire public school system was shut down, and the state made the decision to rebuild it from scratch. This morning, in Recovery to Restructure, Leah McNeil takes you inside the nation's boldest school experiment.
Two words.
I never forget.
Mandatory evacuation.
Mandatory evacuation. I am telling everyone to evacuate if you can.
For two educators 20 years ago.
Everybody had some sort of a loss, whether it was a loss of life, a loss of property, or a loss of your spirit.
Changed everything.
We got that call around 4 p.m. We talked to our students. We evacuated. And August 28th is the last time I actually saw some of the youth I was working with at Edna High School. 2 lives and thousands more altered as Hurricane Katrina hit New Orleans on August 29th, 2005.
Our spirits were low. Everybody in the educational realm that I had contact with, we all had the same feeling, not being able to go back to what we knew.
The storm passed. Then the levees broke.
Trying to get the attention of rescuers.
The pictures that are the most heartbreaking to me are the pictures of the children.
Loss of life, loss of land, loss of everything.
All the entire north side of these buildings, the windows are completely blown out.
The city closed. The schools were no exception. Of the 126 Orleans Parish District campuses, 110 were severely damaged. The rush to reopen started with less than 10 schools in November of 2005.
We were still family, but our trajectory changed.
While still coping with personal loss, then Orleans Parish School teachers Jamar McNeely and Tara Johnson faced another challenge.
I can remember in that fall when I was worried about where I was going to work, which was going to happen, my rebuilding back in New Orleans, I received a termination letter from the district. I was fired.
By March 2006, Orleans Parish schools were in financial crisis and laid off thousands of employees, initially put on disaster leave.
Some individuals never returned.
By then, a plan to restructure the entire school system was already in motion.
Psychologically, to be honest with you, when I received that termination letter, it did take something out of me. It did make me feel very sour on what was happening with this new system called charters.
There are two sides to every story.
The state only took failing schools, and trust me when I say these schools were failing.
Different viewpoints on what happened in Orleans Parish schools after Katrina.
It was a ruthless grab, and I think people who did that should be ashamed of themselves.
But first, let's back up.
So before Hurricane Katrina, New Orleans was ranked at the bottom of the state. And at the time, the state was ranked at the bottom of the country.
That's Jamie Carroll with the Education Research Alliance. The organization, based at Tulane University, aims to use data to improve student outcomes. Research from the ERA shows for the school year before Katrina, OPSB ranked second to last in Louisiana for math and reading. The high school graduation rate was 56%. 10 percentage points below the state average then.
So that's where Act 35 came about, where they used the mechanism of the state takeover to take over schools that were performing below the state average.
Before Katrina, the State Recovery School District had opened 5 charter schools in Orleans Parish. In November 2005, Act 35 classified more than 100 OPSB schools as failing. That laid the groundwork to transition to charter schools.
Previously, only schools that were considered failing in terms of having really low test scores were allowed to be taken over by the state. Act 35 said for New Orleans only, any school performing below the average of state test scores could be taken over by the state.
When the state raised standards for school districts for all the children throughout Louisiana, okay? So just not for New Orleans.
Paul Vallis, the second RSD superintendent, argues the shift to publicly funded, privately operated charter schools was essential to reopening and improving school performance, not a state-targeted move against New Orleans.
I actually arrived to the scene about a year and a half after Katrina, in part because they had extreme difficulties getting the schools open.
Vallis says pre-Katrina, the school district struggled financially and had outdated facilities. But above all,
the bottom line is the vast majority of schools were failing.
Schools were given expectations. The district was given expectations. A vast majority of the schools met the expectations. Yet, people are saying the schools in New Orleans are really bad.
Dave Cash, president of the United Teachers of New Orleans, says the state targeted the city to create today's charter system, despite schools meeting pre-storm standards, later deemed as failing.
So there's an A through F grading system that exists now that didn't exist at the time of Katrina, but it would be what we call an F school now.
They basically just rigged the system overnight and said, oh yeah, it's now all these schools that we said were fine are actually not fine, just so that we can, and if we say they're not fine, that means we can put them in the recovery school district.
Cash says reformers used test scores to justify restructuring OPSB, with teacher and staff layoffs playing a key role. The move sparked a lawsuit over wrongful termination. Though dismissed in 2014, a 2012 ruling from Judge Ethel S. Julian sided with teachers, pointing to the state raising the passing score. She writes, it was 60 before Katrina, but was raised to 87.5 the day the state took control of OPSB on November 30th, 2005. Cash says Act 35 hit black educators the hardest.
The teaching force here was, like the student population, predominantly black and predominantly people from New Orleans. Our union had helped build the black middle class by helping to continually raise the living and working conditions of teachers. When you get rid of that, then and you take away all those black teachers that had been there, it means that students, you know, who used to be nurtured by people who understood them because they lived in their same neighborhoods and you know, understood their same culture, are gone now. And when you say they didn't come back, like a lot of them wanted to come back, but they were scapegoated.
While juggling getting schools reopened and rebuilding the teacher workforce, organizations like Teach for America stepped in to fill hundreds of vacancies with fresh college grads who pledged a 2-year commitment.
So I came here in 2008 to teach in New Orleans schools.
Carol was one of them.
I thought I was coming in to take jobs that weren't wanted. I had no idea that I was coming in to steal the job from a teacher who'd been teaching for many years. I would have quit within a week if it wasn't for those veteran teachers within that school, because I had no idea what I was doing. I was entirely unprepared. Bringing in people from outside into communities to try to teach students, that is creating a gap between the student and the teacher that doesn't need to be there. That is really hard to erase.
While some are convinced the community was cut out of the rebuilding process completely, RSD Superintendent Vallis recalls making efforts to include the community as the new system started to take shape and rehire teachers.
We worked with community-based organizations to meet with a plethora of community groups and parents. And we had regular town hall meetings and public forums, particularly about facilitating the return of teachers and giving teachers an opportunity. And as I said, virtually any teacher that returned and was in good standing was actually hired.
By the time Vallis left New Orleans as superintendent in 2011, $1.8 billion was secured to rebuild and repair schools. The percentage of failing schools dropped from 47% to 29%, and the slow trickle of veteran teachers returned.
For me, it was more personal. I'm not anyone's biological mother, but I have plenty children that I can call my own. And for me, it was a need to come back and a want.
I had never heard about charters before. I had never worked in a charter. I was a traditional educator, but most importantly, regardless of charter, regardless of district, I just wanted to get back and work with my students and families.
The two educators dived into the new system, and now 20 years later, they're leading their own charter networks.
It's become an everyday task to make sure that we help them and assist them in any way possible.
I cannot do this without the youth who are working and fighting in our schools each and every single day, who give me the strength to keep doing this work. If it wasn't for them, the naysayers, the doubters, the downers will win.
While some see clear charter school successes, others worry too many students are still slipping through the cracks.
My issue is not that it's an all-charter district, because the reform said choice. Well, if you have one choice, then is it real choice?
The folks like Mr. Paul Vallis, some of the folks on the school board who are really strong supporters of the charter school system. They say it works.
Who does it work for?
Well, tomorrow morning, Leah continues to explore this recovery to restructure. Join us tomorrow morning at 7 to hear more on how the city's charter system has impacted the community and where it stands today.